Good morning, good afternoon, good afternoon, evening, depending on which part of the world you're at. For me, it's very early in the morning. I know that Beju is in Stockholm and Arvinder is in London, so that's good afternoon for you. Welcome everyone to the CBDC broadcast number 27, in which we're going to deal with mitigating risks in tokenized securities and CBDC integration. We're going to allow a couple of seconds for people to join. So welcome and make yourself comfortable. So let's start with the housekeeping. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes getting you into an introduction to our co-speakers, which today we have Arvider Bharath, I hope I pronounced it correctly, and Beju Shah. We're going to have their introduction. They're going to introduce themselves because no one introduces yourself as yourself. That's the best way to do it. We're going to have the usual framework in which we're going to have a discussion about 45 minutes with the co-speakers. And then we're going to have 10 to 15 minutes in which we're going to answer questions from the public. So if you want to send your question, please do so in the Q&A widget that we have embedded in WebEx. So I think that we're we can start, and we have enough attendees to start. So let's start with the broadcast speakers that we have today. I already mentioned that we have today Beju Shah, which is head of Nordic Center of BIS Innovation Hub, and we have Arvinder Bharath, lead digital expert at the IMF. So Arvinder and Beju, thank you very much for joining us. We're really happy to have you here. And I'm going to allow you both to introduce yourselves.
Okay, well, I shall go first. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. And thanks for putting the intros up, Carlos. So I'm not going to say too much because the audience can potentially read most of what's on there. But the important part is I'm currently with the IMF. I joined the fund 2 years ago, and I contribute by providing technical assistance and guidance to member countries in the areas of digitalization. And that's not just to the central banks, but also the ministries of finance and other authorities within the country. The reason I am with the IMF is because I bring to bear a blend of experience from commercial banking all over the world and regulatory and policy setting work within Trinidad and the Caribbean, because we set up quite a few inter-central bank forums and discussions. And of course, having a passion for information security and overall digital efforts that have been taking over the world, including AI and all of those things. So my commitment, my work focuses on ensuring that we don't hold back from the adoption of technology, but we do it responsibly. We do it with the awareness of risks that they come with. So that's where my focus currently stands. Over to you, Beju.
Wonderful. And I think that I would say that Arvinder and I have a lot of synergy in this area. So I'm Beju Shah, I'm the head of the Nordic Centre for the BIS Innovation Hub. Prior to that, I was at the Bank of England, again, leading on a number of large-scale sort of data and digital transformation initiatives, international work, but also heavily involved in innovation. I think during that time, whether it's been on in this role or previous on CBDC or future of money and payments or even AI or anything else that we've tried to push the boundary on, these fundamentals around security and privacy and everything else and resilience, they will always stand the test of time and also play a part in a very changing threat landscape. So I'm really happy to be able to be here today, talk about this stuff and share our work, but also to have a double act with Arvinder on this. So yeah, off we go.
Thank you. I think that you already introduced this topic of our conversation today, but I'm going to have like a couple of sentences about that. And it's about everything is about cybersecurity at the end, or most of it, because that's something that we at least in these CBDC broadcasts, we have not dealt with a lot. I mean, we all know that cybersecurity and anonymity and some other features of retail CBDCs and or wholesale CBDCs and other types of tokenized securities, it's something that it's there, but it's something that is not perhaps not widely discussed. And as you both have worked on some projects led by the BIS that have to do with this type of problem or issue of these new digital assets or securities, this is a very important topic for us to deal with in our CBDC broadcast. So I think that with that introduction, I think that we can start. So perhaps the best thing to talk about now is cyber risk. That's a very interesting enough topic, and it's something that has been out there for a long time. So can you both share your perspectives on why it remains as one of the key risks to the financial system? Who wants to go first?
Shall I, Beju? Do you want me to go first?
I'll you first, yeah.
Okay, it's a curious phenomenon because when I was at the central bank, I established a role for information security, and cyber risk, of course, at that moment in time, and this is several years ago, was right at the top risk within the central bank as well as within the financial sector, because the Bangladesh heist had just happened, where lots of money was lost as a result of a cyber attack using the SWIFT payment portal, and over the years, that red cyber risk, that rating of severe with high impact and all of that never moved. And every time this discussion used to take place at the board level, it was always, well, you're doing so much work towards it, you're spending so much of our money trying to mitigate this risk, but the needle doesn't move. Why is that needle is stuck on red? And really, it is because it is dynamic. The mitigation efforts continue to increase. A lot more countries, a lot more institutions are spending a lot more money, a lot more resources are dedicated to it. But on the flip side, it continues to morph. You can now buy, ransomware as a service for like $5 on the dark web. The skill sets, the barriers to entry for attackers have gone down tremendously. They're using tools that we use for defenses like AI and quantum cryptography and so on. They're using it for attack purposes. And then what's happened is the world has moved towards digitalization in a big way in the last several years since COVID happened, and even before, but it got accelerated further with COVID. So lots more digitalization, attack surface gets bigger, lots more interconnectivity. So the transmission channels get much wider and interconnected and higher impact, lower barriers to entry. The skill sets that are required to contain this kind of risk are also in short supply, because they continue, we're just not producing enough, in response to the demand for information security professionals. And then, of course, the attacker side, the offensive side is also recruiting, and they pay more, I think, than normal institutions who are looking for defenses. So all in all, it's just not the kind of risk that one could say that we have mitigated, done and dusted. It's not something you could measure easily. It's not like the liquidity risk. You have measures around it. You have the risk of solvency, you have the credit risk, you have all of those other financial risks that, financial sectors worry about. This is just very different. So Beju, please.
Yeah, I think to build on that, I think when you financial crime has always been there, and people have found creative ways of circumventing things, and always, if you close one hole, they'll find another hole. Right, and that's just the way it is. And also there's a level of visibility that you just don't have because of how things move around. Now, if you look at that digital landscape, as I've mentioned, with increasing payment services, with increasing services, increasing digitalization, you get more fragmentation across the landscape, more channels for data to move through, and environments to move in and out, and less visibility and more avenues that can be exploited. Now, then if you look at a lot of the purpose of cybercrime, yes, is to get information out or that, but some of it's financially motivated, ransomware, other things as well, extortion, whatever it might be. Those worlds are together and have come together. Now, you add in acceleration with new AI tools that lower barrier to entry, all sorts of things. You have a very, very dynamic and this escalating threat landscape to the point that actually, you know, you're going to struggle to kind of keep up, in the sense of, because you need to understand actually how all these things are interconnected and have that holistic response. And right now, on some of these things of how you do cyber monitoring and fin crime monitoring, and even that fragments into other boxes, you're having very siloed data views, when actually sometimes now with that digital landscape, you need to look at it very holistically. And actually, because it's changing so rapidly and augmented constantly by all the things that I've mentioned, it will constantly be this risk. And actually the stakes are getting higher, because, you know, if you bring geopolitics into this, I mean, let's talk about this in the sense that some will benefit more from being more strategically advantaged in a digital landscape, because that's an easier way for them to counteract. So I know there's a more advanced, but actually in this case, actually cyber is becoming that new battleground, and you've seen that in current conflicts and other stuff as well. I mean, I shouldn't really talk about, but actually you can draw a lot from them. We speak to some local cybersecurity companies who are kind of frontline in one of those, in defending one side, and you know, they can say this has changed everything. Now we can see a playbook, and that risk to the financial system is ever increasing, because actually these are going to be strategic things. And obviously the way you want to take out, you can go after a financial system, a payment system, the minute you undermine confidence. It doesn't matter whether it's the current system or a CBDC, right? That's it, right? Yeah. And so security, resilience, trust is paramount. And if we're not thinking about these things from now, you're not going to make good design architecture decisions. You're not going to understand the threats from now. You're going to build the skills you need. And Arvinder made a really good point. Recruiting the skills, particularly for public institutions that are on the hook for defending or preventing or whatever, is incredibly difficult. And actually that's going to warrant a shift in how these institutions recruit, how they prioritize budgets and everything else, because that threat landscape is changing so rapidly and affecting both public and private. And you know, you can't take away, you know, you can't not do anything about it now, basically.
Yeah. And you made a very good point there, Beju, in terms of the importance of trust, you know, particularly in the financial sector. You don't have too many chances, you know, once there is an outage of some sort, or some understanding that there has been a cyber attack, and, you know, the systems are vulnerable, systems that keep the payment rails going, keep the financial stability going. If those are questioned, you know, that trust is definitely eroded and the confidence goes, and that's when systemic implications come out. So it's not one to be sneezed at all.
And the other thing is, I just want to add that it doesn't have to actually have happened. So one of the things that came out through our handbook on in Polaris is the fact that I can pretend I've broken you and created a lot of YouTube videos and have it go viral.
Yeah.
And that alone will just undermine confidence, right? And actually, to be honest, for some countries, that's more on the mind than actually an actual physical attack, because that's actually hard. Actually, the disinformation around it, actually people believe that more, because that'll go viral very quickly, you know. So so we're in an interesting dynamic of what's even something fake can have such a huge impact, and that has a risk in the world of deepfakes and other stuff as well. So yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
I have a question now. Arvinder, you mentioned Bangladesh case, and if I ask you for some other cases of central banks being victims of a fraud or a scam, if we look into the literature, we will find Bangladesh, we will find Banco de Mexico, we will find some other which are like the typical, but there are no more than a handful of them.
Yeah.
But if we go to the retail fraud and scams, we'll find millions of them, of cases. Yeah. And I mean, what you mentioned rang me a bell in my head, because we were working at FNA at some transactional anomaly detection for one of our central bank clients. And I think that perhaps, and that this is like an out of, let's say it's a little bit far from what we're going to discuss, but it's interesting nevertheless. Is it the case that perhaps for wholesale or central bank payment systems, this kind of cybersecurity is not that well documented as we have for retail payment systems?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by documented, but the first thing I'd say, the reason you don't find too many examples of central banks having been attacked or successfully attacked which is what you would normally see. I mean, attempted attacks don't get published as much. We used to ward off attacks all the time. But what has happened, the traditional central banking environment is very well protected. Most central banks around the world, emerging markets and others, have invested a lot of money and a lot of training in terms of skills, developing skill sets within the information security departments, but also creating awareness of the risk amongst its wider employee base, so that the detection and so on is much easier. So the central banks themselves, with the traditional centralized systems, have been able to fortify them a lot better. The issues begin is when you start to open these fortresses out, when you start to now think about digital currencies, when you start to think about open source deployment, when you start to think about payment system providers getting easy access to your ecosystem and all of that, that's when the risk starts to get bigger, because your attack surface is getting bigger. As I said, the transmission channels increase. So we've got, like, for RTGS, for SWIFT protection and so on, you've got a combination of facilities, physical and logical security. You've got 4I principles, 6I principles. You've got so much. You've got military-grade data centers that house these things. Core systems are very well protected and they're closed up. But as you get into the retail story, a lot more is open, a lot more consumer demand for seamless transactions, for seamless integration with all of the various apps you've got, has created this interconnectivity that has made it possible to just use a small window or a small vulnerability to get through and create issues. And nowadays, it doesn't even have to be small, as Beju was saying, in terms of use of AI and so on for the attackers, allows them to find vulnerabilities in your system that you don't know about. You haven't figured out yourself as yet, and things happen. Or they now know who to attack, like what happened with SolarWinds. Attack an organization whose product is used by the majority of organizations in the world. If you attack them, exactly. So these are some of the reasons. I mean, the Bangladesh heist was really a wake-up call for a lot of central banks. I have to say that was almost like a tipping point where the focus just became very sharp on information security.
And I say on the Bangladesh point as well, I was speaking to someone last week as well. Essentially, that was your patient zero, right? For something of what is the beginning of something more. But underscore, central banks do have robust control measures, risk measures, particularly around the CNI, critical national infrastructure systems as well. There's no choice around that, because obviously they are high targets and very good at defending. That doesn't mean foolproof, but yeah, as not to labor the point, when you get into the retail space, again, the more endpoints you have, the more ecosystems you can move through, the more new tech that's out there that isn't particularly needs more hardening, untested, has vulnerabilities. Also, you're not sure who kind of maybe developed it and that chain of development. You've got vulnerabilities that are there that aren't subject to the usual hardening of the incumbent systems, and that does add a lot of other risk as well. And also, some of these things are moving at such pace, you're only finding vulnerabilities and issues afterwards, and therefore having to kind of stick it on after that. Damage has been done, the damage could be quite big, and you just don't know. And so that adds a lot of complexity. And I think because of that dynamic nature, it's institutions like ourselves really do need to keep at pace and make sure, as far as possible, the right people have are armed with the right knowledge at the right time. So this is where the innovation functions in the organizations actually play that kind of really needed line to go, there's something going on here you should pay attention to, or we value your views to kind of temper it, because we might have to either oversold it or to understand actually what's on the mind. So this is escalating, and I think we can't get away from it. But it doesn't matter what you're building, if it's improving the current system or future money or whatever it might be, cyber, fin crime, these aspects, both are joined. But if you're not designing for these things in mind right now in terms of their prevention or detection, then you're already on the back foot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you both for your answer. I think that your answer it's perfect for entering the next part of the conversation, which is, as Arvinder mentioned, I mean, we're increasing you mentioned the area of attack of the systems now. So what has Project Polaris specifically contributed to identifying and mitigating risks in tokenized securities, which by definition normally they have distributed ledger technologies or some other type of non-centralized solutions to the registry and to the processing? And what are the takeaways for central banks from this Project Polaris? Beju, perhaps.
Yeah, so if we focus on that piece, and I know, I mean, both institutions are doing broad pieces around this at different levels, and everyone can speak to what they're doing in a minute. Polaris focused narrowly on secure and resilient CBDC systems on the technical angle. One aspect of that was obviously offline, because that was one big area of what was a gap in knowledge, and being honest, amongst all central banks, because it's complex. There's lots of new technology, new threats, new risks, etc., etc. So understanding that and some landscaping around that. So I'll talk about that first. One, saying what is this thing? What's out there? Why are we doing it? What technology is this? And then what risks manifest as a result in that landscape? What are some mitigations to consider around this, or what you should be, where is there a gap that needs to be addressed, and in kind of what area? So it's like all things you need to consider. Now, there's those kind of cyber or kind of physical risks, but there's also other risks that arise from not thinking about privacy in the right way, or even the different levels of resilience requirements, because that invites other risks, or the inclusion dynamics. It's not just financial, there's also digital and social. So if you consider that as one piece of work, is saying here's all the things you need to think about from a risk societal point of view, and do that. Now then, that went deeper in terms of, well, we did a deep dive with several vendors, extracted that, aggregated that up into, well, here's all the things you need to know about. Here's a design guide, and for roughly three scenarios. I mean, we could have done more, but I think 3 generic scenarios that then other countries can take and adapt. This is how you would need to think about your choices around offline. Now, related to that, what came out was actually using new technologies and everything else. So we need to come up with some sort of cybersecurity and resilience framework. And this is a guide. So it takes the standards that are already out there, that are typically used by almost all central banks, and then augments them, but comes up with a 7-step model that central banks can use. And it's a baseline thing to say, well, it's about 100 controls in there and about 40 focus on prevention. But as a baseline, so we can say, well, here's this, now let's discuss it and improve upon it. But it's to start saying, you need to think about this, and here's a way to think about this, right? So we put that on the table. Last November, we also then had a conference in Basel, where we had about 200 various public-private to really talk about this properly, right? To say it's now on the table. And actually a lot of people in the private sector said, actually, we're glad that actually now you put this up on the table. The other things that have also happened, we did our Cyber Resilience Center along with us, we did some research, on what can we learn from DeFi attacks that could be relevant to DLT-based CBDC systems. And that led to some findings, a lot around smart contracts and everything else, but a call to action into MITRE to say, actually, let's also augment their threat model for CBDCs. Yeah, so that's the conversation that's ongoing at the moment. And so these are ways that we're trying to advance the kind of conversation around it, and there will be more work just generally around security or things that impact security, whether that's through Polaris or other work on Aurora, because actually the FinCrime and side of things come down, and Aurora's our anti-FinCrime project. So there's things in there that are very relevant to the cyber world that we'll be doing. And then Arvinder and team are doing some amazing things too, so that you should talk about that. So.
Yeah, well, what we've been doing, and you're absolutely right. The Polaris framework, I mean, offline is great, and even the framework is the only one out there at this point in time, because countries are looking for guidance as they're exploring CBDCs or other kinds of digitization to say, what do they need to strengthen? And Project Polaris's adaptiveness framework comes in very handy. What we've been doing on the IMF side is, as I said earlier on, providing technical assistance to various countries and for various types of digitization. And quite commonly it is on CBDC, because so many central banks are currently exploring CBDCs. So we've come up with, we've launched, rather not come up with, we've launched a virtual CBDC handbook, which came out last year, well, it was announced last year in November by the managing director. And it consists of 20 chapters, 20 odd chapters. And 5 of these were published last year as wave 1. Another 4 are going to be published this year as wave 2, and so it will go. And it's not going to be a static handbook, it's a virtual handbook, so it will always evolve and iterate. But importantly, one of the chapters which I have written is on cybersecurity of CBDC, where of course I collaborated with Beju and William at the BIS as well, and we've made reference to each other's work. It basically looks at, the chapter talks about the manifestation of cyber risk in the ecosystem, in a CBDC ecosystem, the impact that it can have, the channels of transmission that become available, which are different to the traditional payment systems. So you've got the normal risks of a payment system associated with a digital currency also, but there are other risks that become that are surfaced as a result of that level of digitization. And then it goes into the implication of design choices, because there are several design choices where CBDCs are concerned. You could be, the distribution model could be direct or multi-tiered. You could be using centralized ledgers versus DLT or blockchain. You could be using programmability or not. You may want offline or not, as the case may be. So it dissects or unpacks these design choices and comes up with some potential mitigations of the specific risks of these choices. And then it talks about a general set of principles that are important to think about. And these principles are like, the CBDC ought to have at least the highest level of security afforded to a normal payments environment, and some more. It talks about minimizing or reducing the attack surface. That doesn't mean that you don't do things that are important. That means that you consider the essentials and the nice to haves. And even if you want all of it, do it in such a way that the design considers the implications of it all, but perhaps the implementation is staggered. So you do it, do the essentials first, test and learn from it, then layer on others, but having thought through the design phase first. They should make the point earlier in that if you don't think about security requirements upfront, it becomes very, very difficult. You're already on a back foot. And you would probably stay there, because bolting on security measures later on is costly and it's inefficient in terms of, and less effective than it would be if it was secure by design. So it speaks of those principles, and there are 4 of them. It also gets into the importance of project management, which also goes back to what Polaris has done. And then it goes into saying, well, look, these, there are many challenges, but all it needs really is, is to think through the deployment from the very beginning. Take your time in the various stages of the project to ensure that all of the risks are surfaced and mitigated. Some risks just don't come up in test scenarios. I take the example of what happened with Dcash in the ECCB. They started their process some time ago. There are 8 islands, and they had gone live with 7 of them, and suddenly they had an outage, and it really eroded the trust. And they did the 8th island. Now they had to close off version 1 of Dcash, and they are thinking Dcash 2.0. It is very important for them to have this digital currency, but the public needs to embrace it. And that outage was created by something that would not have been top of mind.
Yeah, operational risk. It was not even cyber risk.
Well, it's not cyber risk. It was an operational risk, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not something you would have tested for, is what I'm saying specifically. So that's the importance of staying in a pilot stage for a period of time. So these things surface. Give it some time before you go.
Staying in that stage, though, I think that's the important thing, is that building that awareness and knowledge now of that threat landscape. It's fine for us, to go, shiny tokens, AI, what. But actually, the big stuff that we actually need to solve, that actually, if anyone is listening and really wants to really improve their career on, is to go after this hard and scary stuff, because actually that's going to stand the test of time. Financial crime is not going away. Cyber risk is not going away. However, understanding that means you're better prepared to address an evolving tech landscape, because the threats are okay. How they manifest will be different. If tech is changing, actually how they go through those channels is different, and you need to understand that. And if we're not understanding the dynamic and deep nature of these risks from now, and even how they link together, you can't prevent and you can't predict. And actually, these are the skills that we'll need. You can't react or buy them in at the last minute when something's happened. They have to happen from now. And institutions like such as central banks or authorities actually, for this thing, whether it's payments or a CBDC landscape, actually need those skills and develop them. And actually, they need to keep evolving with that as the threat landscape grows, because you're not going to be able to really even stand a chance of predicting how something could happen unless you've got that nuance.
But the good thing, though, that's coming out of this entire exercise, this entire CBDC exploration that's going on, and a bit of sort of insights coming from vendors, insights coming from the central bank practitioners themselves who are experimenting and so on, it's really giving them an opportunity to rethink their payment systems. I mean, these systems are by nature quite legacy systems that have evolved over time. And now, when new technologies are out there, how do you integrate those? It's very difficult to do that by layering them with the legacy systems. So when you start thinking about a completely new infrastructure, like what the CBDC demands, you start to think about, I'm going to make it future-proof. I'm going to deploy the frontier technologies into it, make it modern, make it scalable, make it, fit for purpose in the context of the kind of demand that is likely to happen. So that's creating the excitement. There is that hesitation that this is complicated and so on, but it's creating a lot of excitement amongst those authorities who've not done that for a long time.
And I think there is something very interesting that I can extract from your answer, from both of your answers, and it's network effects. Which is the retail CBDC, I mean, all the efforts that we have seen of rollout in Jamaica and Bahamas, Nigeria, ECB countries, I mean, the adoption has been very low and slow. So I would expect that if in some case there is some real network effect that the retail CBDC gets adopted, I think that the fraudsters and scammers will try to attack it. If it's not adopted, it's like everyone saying, and I think this is like, I'm not sure how likely or if this is true or not, is when they say that if you buy a Mac computer, there are no malware and there is like no virus, because I mean Windows is the prevalent type of operating system. That kind of network effect, I mean, if CBDCs get adopted, I think that the fraudster and scammers will try to attack it. So I think that we're going to see how good the cybersecurity things are for those systems just after they are adopted, not before. So I think that's also a challenge, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, look, we have projects on one of our centers that's looking at that future threat landscape, going, what are we likely to see, and what can we learn from crypto or anything else that you're likely to see replicate? Because some behaviors are going to fall through, that digital. But you can't put it. I mean, you're right. Criminals will they'll abuse it straight and find ways that we can't even predict. And even if it's not fully used, they will still abuse it, because it's something that someone's looking at, right? So if it's there, it will get abused no matter what. And so we just have to prepare. Now, also the point around how good it is, you can only do what you can ahead, and some of the other protection measures are there. But when you're dealing with a very creative element that will find every way to circumvent it, whatever it might be, until you see it and you have that cooperation between people who can almost go, oh, I saw that bad behavior, let me tell all my friends. There's information sharing element, then you're still on the back foot, right? So tech is only as good as some things, and actually some other intelligence to help that is also useful in how you share information. So it's not a one size fits all. It's not one thing to say. It's in the same way you may, for example, the whole thing around, well, how am I going to verify in the world of deep fakes and synthetic IDs and so on, which also complicate everything around fraud, well, make fraud worse, but also complicate the detection of it. Means also anything that you're trying to detect well, if you're using, for example, privacy technologies, well, then you're almost privacy protecting the things that are synthetic. So then how do you make sure that you're only privacy protecting the things that should be and the things that don't? And also then what's required, because actually this is what came up in our summit as well, a single way to encrypt or cryptographic sign thing might not be sufficient, and you may need multiple ways combined from different sources to make it harder to break in a world where actually these things are going to be easier and easier to break and are being broken. And also in a world where even the biometric stuff that we have typically relied on for maybe 5+ years, facial recognition stuff, is being broken through highly synthetic kind of silicon masks or 3D printed fingerprints and all sorts of stuff.
Absolutely.
Where and this is accelerating at a pace. Well, you come out with voice recognition and stuff. I mean, my parents don't stand a chance. I'm trying to educate my dad, saying if he gets a call saying it's me, it's not me. Partly because I only call you in this way, so whatever. But so things like that. So so all these things, and we don't know enough now because they're constantly changing. So we do need to stay on top of it, and we will know more at a time. But that goes exponentially. And in the context of designing whatever a future payment system, money system might be, you need to keep pace with that and just do the best you can, going, we're not going to solve all of it, but actually we know enough to threat. Now that risk appetite, some institutions probably don't go, well, if I can't solve it 100%, I'm not going to do anything. That's sometimes, but actually they're dealing with risks every day and just putting the mitigations right, knowing full well that they've done everything they can to block it based on controls, and someone will find a way through. And it's the same with cyber attacks. Expect to be attacked. You can do everything you can to prevent it, but you're not going to stop someone from breaking in. That's just reality. So
just going to say that, actually, Beju, I'm glad you ended with that point. You're just not going to avoid these attacks. It's going to happen because they are going to be a step ahead. It's their day job, right? So it comes down to resiliency, building resiliency in your systems, ensuring that there is recoverability, ensuring that there is containment and management of the risk that's done. And Beju, you mentioned it is difficult from the adoption is low, there isn't critical mass, the attacks are anticipated and all of that. Even the control measures that we think about, not only can we not anticipate the type of attack that may happen with heavy adoption of a CBDC, we could project. Even the control measures like the post-quantum or quantum-resistant cryptography and stuff that standard setting bodies are now publishing, it's difficult. It's really difficult to fully test those. How are you going to find enough quantum computers today to really test whether these things are quantum resistant? There aren't that many around. So the complexity of this type of risk management, particularly future-proofing the risk management, is from various angles. It needs to be looked at from various angles, but it's still very exciting because it's not unsurmountable. Payment systems are payment systems, whether they're digitalized or not. Programming vulnerabilities exist today. Smart contracts are based on programs, based on code. Coding practices could be strengthened. Integrating, and there is another paper that the BIS released in November of 2023, which is a very interesting one in terms of integrating cyber risk management with your enterprise risk management. How do you do that, and how important it is to do that? It becomes like neck and neck. Many institutions have done it already, but it's a really good paper to read. I recommend it. So many complexities in this dynamic world where cyber is concerned, not going away.
That's true. We're running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to speed up things a little bit as well. So we have already discuss some of the risks and the mitigation strategies already, but I would like to have, for the sake of the attendees, what do you think are the primary risks associated with tokenized securities and CBDCs, and what could be the mitigation strategies that you find? Very sharp.
If we're thinking about risk, and actually, if it doesn't CBDC or token, let's just go same, right? Just for the purpose of this, because ultimately some of the things that we're going to have to consider the same. Look, bottom line, in a digital landscape, you can't trust who you're dealing with online, a business, whatever it might be. Given that actually is where the perimeter is getting attacked at the moment, I would say things around, and I'm not talking about digital identity, I'm talking about how you can identify who you're dealing with, trust it, verify it, and that chain of trust and that quality and that provenance of that's central to all of this. And whether you're doing cross-border, CBDC, future payments, non-CBDC, it doesn't matter. That is there, and that's for KYC, KYB, and how there's a digital version of doing that, and in a way that actually you can trust, doesn't corrupt your data, makes things seamless for everyday people and everything else. Because otherwise, if we're not thinking about it very differently, it's adding more friction into things as well. I mean, the mere fact that I use GDPR as an example, the fact that I have to click OK every time I go onto a website is annoying, right? And you just added more friction into something that actually should just be more simpler. But it's that type of thing that you don't want to have in. And I think the next thing then that very relates into both the cyber aspect of that money, both in terms of the infrastructure of this, whether the system's being hacked or if it's being defrauded on the other end, right? So that comes together. Resilience, is it reliable? Can it be trusted? Privacy, and is it reliable? Can it do what it says it's going to do? But also, those are the kind of core things. And then actually, in all of this is, well, ultimately, a digital form of money will need to happen because we're in that digital world. We need to slow down. The most big thing is just slow down, think about actually what we need here and create the conditions where both the private sector can think about it and build off it in the right way. The public sector can think about it in the right way. There's no rush to the front, and it works for society. And that's different for different jurisdictions, but actually we kind of need to be more inward focused rather than the competitive other element or the FOMO element. And really, otherwise we're going to make things are going to not make, we're not going to make the right decisions, or things aren't going to be built in the right way, or going to make a lot of money, or you end up in a world that you don't want to be in. But those are the cool things that are front, and integration as well, right? Those kind of 5-6 things are core amongst everything else, and they do apply more broadly. If you look at holistically, they go across how AI works and all this, and also responsible and ethical use of AI. Because if you think about fraud detection, you're going to have to use some form of AI with this volume of data around that. So, how these systems are designed to ensure that they are enabling the right things for everybody is going to be key as well. So that's what I would kind of leave everyone with. But Arvinder, sorry.
So just add one thing. You're spot on, Beju. I would just like to add users. The worry that we have, in terms of one of the key risks is the users, because you could put guidance, regulations, and so on amongst a lot of the participants of the ecosystems where digital money or tokenized securities, etc., are concerned. And you're right, there is this overlap with CBDC and tokenized securities, but users are not controllable. They are not regulatable. Their devices are in their custody. There are some risks that need to be managed in that regard as well.
Just one more thing as well. It's just, I may have said it, but I've forgotten. It's just that being cognizant of that threat landscape, cyber crime, whatever it might be, is changing and escalating and changing all the time. So being ready with that, with all the other broader things, that is also a very key thing to stay on top of. So.
And I think that the mentioning the user is very important, because that's the whole difference between fraud and scams, right? I mean, fraud is unauthorized access to your account, for instance, and technology can do a lot to prevent that. But we have seen that fraud has decreased, scams have increased, in which case these scams have to do with authorized access to your account, with impersonation, phishing, pig vouchering, so on and so forth. So you, Arvinder, I think that the point you make about the users being the key also into the cybersecurity and the safety and efficient functioning of this new retail or payment system, or wholesale as well, it's the key. And the mitigation is very difficult, because, as you said, you cannot, let's say, control, or you cannot be 100% sure that you have educated the people enough for them to not fall under the scams of criminals. So I think that's a good case.
And I think it's widely known. Over 90% of the cyber attacks are as a result of the human element. It's published data. So it needs to be watched, and it becomes just a little bit more prevalent when it comes to the use of normal money.
Exactly. So for the next question, what collaborative efforts between international organizations such as BIS, IMF, are essential to enhance the security and resilience of this evolving financial ecosystem involving tokenized securities and CBDCs?
Well, I mean, I'll just say, I know the BIS Cyber Resilience Coordination Center, led by David White, they do coordinate our central bank members together, those who want to participate, again, to see what they're seeing and come up with common practices. And also, they do some cyber range exercises, they do some role playing, they do a number of things to also kind of advance both capability, but also kind of learning and understanding, and also kind of addressing kind of emerging threats. That being said, also, you know, we're always kind of, there's always a gap between where things are and how we're kind of playing catch up. So again, these types of conversations and discussing with you know, various experts in the private sector is key for us to kind of make sure that we keep that gap to, well, lesser. I would say eliminated, because that's impossible. But yeah, so that's hard. But IMF does some amazing things too as well. So
yeah, well, we collaborate quite a bit. David White and his team, and you know, I have a regular dialogue with them, and I've been involved in at least one of their cyber range exercises, which is excellent. I mean, that's really knowledge building, capacity development on the ground. It's amazing. It's great. From the IMF side, we don't do the level of experimentation on our own as the BIS does, but we leverage a lot of what you guys do. We learn from it a lot, and we are observers in many of your projects. We do a lot of other types of collaboration, like Beju and I have collaborated previously and will continue to do so in this space. The difference between the two organizations, the only difference I see is the membership. You know, the IMF has a wider membership, whereas the BIS has a different type of membership, and therefore the insights that we gain are important together to, you know, sort of to combine those insights and say, well, you know, this type of country or this profile of countries, which there may be so many of, are looking at this area or are weak in these areas where capacity needs to be developed versus some of the others who are doing very well. So we actually even play like brokers and bring countries together and say, you know, you, country X, need help with something that country Y on the other side of the continent or the other side of the world has really done a lot of work in. So here you go, talk to each other, or we will have conferences ourselves or workshops that we develop where we bring guest speakers from both sides to share their knowledge. I mean, Beju was a guest speaker in our community of practice workshop in April just this year, where he spoke about the future of money and the cyber risks and how to manage them. And I think it was you guys, well, not I think, I know you guys brought MITRE to the table as well in terms of their threat modeling and how they're incorporating digital money into that. So that I think is essential, not just from the perspective of information sharing because we have different vantage points, but also we're all developing our own skills as well as we go along, because you just can't help it. You are on the ground, you're learning as you go, you're researching as you go. And I think together, the sum of two parts is not just the sum of two parts. Is, you know, it improves by a magnitude. And I think it's really important that we continue to do that. Our engagements are different. When we talk to the vendors, we talk from a different perspective to when BIS talks to vendors. We may come back with the same insights, but if there are any gaps, you know, it's nice to fill those together.
And it's also important that we can convene, because actually whatever we bring together goes across all of our memberships, and therefore we can help change or kind of that knowledge building at speed and at scale, rather than if all of them doing it by themselves. So that's why, you know, this work is particularly on these things where you're doing things on digital stuff. You have to kind of collaborate globally. You can't do it in isolation, otherwise you get up with the same results that you've got now, same issues you've got now.
So we're running out of time, so I'm going to jump to the last question, which for you that have been here before, normally it's about prediction. I mean, and this is like the fourth time that I mentioned that Nobel Award winner Niels Bohr for physics, he always said that prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future, which is very pun intended thing. So what is your, let's say, prediction or your expectation about this trade-off between new technologies or emerging technologies such as blockchain, DLT, AI, machine learning, so on, regarding the functioning of the system? I mean, the benefits that it could bring to the systems, but also the challenges and the threats that it could bring to the safe functioning of the systems. How do you see this trade-off evolving?
Yeah, I think when you look at, let's talk about DLT, digital ledgers, distributed ledgers. And let's also talk about AI. To me, those are transformative. They're not going to go away. There are risks and they just need to be managed. We just need to grow up and manage those risks. We need to understand what they are, continue to understand what they're likely to be. There's enough intelligence on the ground, and we also have these tools that can help us, the same tools that we're talking about. DLT to me is phenomenal. I mean, what it brings to bear today is stuff that we haven't had. It handles efficiency issues, it handles speed issues, it handles cost issues, it handles trust issues. There's so many good things that DLT brings to the table, but it's not immune to risks. They need to be managed. It's not immune to the erosion of trust that we need to manage, and so on. The utility of DLT, I mean, we're looking at how experimentation is going on with the central banks, and there is a shift happening. You know, a lot of central banks started looking at retail CBDCs. They're still looking at them, but more and more central banks are now starting to look at wholesale CBDCs and using the same technology, DLT technology that they were talking about in retail, for things like tokenization. They're looking at better utility of that technology, more efficient utility of that technology while the technology matures, because it isn't mature enough yet. It's still relatively new. Skill sets to run the technology are also not as widely available as the traditional skill sets in IT would be. So we need to give it time to mature. We need to help it mature, but we need to also embrace it in order for it to mature. There is definitely a future in that. And AI, I think, is just generative AI. To me, it's not just to me. Many have said this before. It's almost like the invention of fire. It's just not going to go anywhere. It is going to continue to help with things and continue to create distractions. So again, it comes down to managing it, not going away anywhere too soon.
Yeah, I agree. I think on trade-offs, less about the trade-offs. Actually, we should be rising to a challenge of saying these technologies can do a lot, and therefore the expectation on these developments is to ensure X, Y, Z, figure it out. Because the ones who are developing this do have a lot of resources and skills and attract the skills to be thinking about this in the right way. So this shouldn't be really, if it means that if it's something's not ready yet or needs to mature further, because it then needs to do the right thing, then actually that's the right conversation to have. And in the case of things like DLT and so on, so it's not a question about not using something because it's not quite ready yet. And I've had a few conversations in the last couple of months where it's like, oh, well, this is too hard right now. It's not quite ready yet, so we won't do it. So have you thought about actually maybe resolving or working with how it could be, or how much is it ready and where's your risk, and then what controls you put around it now, which will be less as it matures, right? So let's have a risk-based conversation too. So you can't get away from the fact that these technologies are coming, but it's also how you hold them to account to make sure they are doing what we need them to be doing. Now, in an everyday commercial, normal context, that's fine. But in the case of what we need these technologies as in the central bank authority, government community or whatever, some of those demands or needs haven't really been communicated to the vendors. And actually we've heard this through our offline work. They're like, well, we know it does this, but we don't know exactly what you need and where's that gap. And then when you have this thing of a chicken and egg thing going, oh, well, we want this and they haven't got it. Oh, well, we don't know what they want. We can't give it. And no one's then talking about what they actually do want and what's possible and what time frame. Whereas actually the vendors go, well, if we need something like that, that's great. But that requires this kind of work to do. That took about a year. Then we need to test it and so on and so on. And so the trade-offs are only a point in time when actually, even if you talk about CBDC or token, whatever it might be, that timeline is not fixed. There'll be a test period, there'll be a rollout, and even then there'll be further refinements. So if we're making decisions based on what we know today and the position in time, we're going to make some bad decisions again, because we're not willing to take a bit of kind of like, okay, where's the risk? And also, what are the mainstream players? If you're constantly looking at the startup landscape, you're not looking at what your incumbents are doing that have the resources and budget, and understand the technology and have a long-term roadmap. Again, there's something around that we need to consider. I mean, no one's really talking about actually what the telecoms networks can provide, should be providing in a future landscape and so on. And, you know, frankly, that's been a bit of a big gap, because we assume that everything is internet based, and actually the telecoms text can move a lot faster, latency and everything else. And actually, if in a future world where we have digital money and driverless stuff and whatever it might be, what do we need for that? And that's the true retail thing, right? And that's a world ahead. Wholesale's perhaps a bit closer, and that's easier to conceptualize. And actually, if you wanted to bring in new tech in that simpler use case, it's easier to protect and harden. It still has its quirks. But when you're on the retail thing, as Arvinder mentioned, your landscape's harder. The demands, consumer experience in 10 years' time is going to be even more impatient than it is now. So, you know, they want it yesterday. So it's just, we have to be thinking about those technologies, and actually some of those players aren't even at the table. No one's really doing that. And we think in a certain paradigm, when actually that world is much broader in terms of what's developing, we should be taking advantage of. So
that's great. Thank you, Beju. Thank you, Arvinder. It has been really interesting conversation. Now we're going to start the Q&As, and I'm going to use my prerogative of being the moderator to have my question first. And we only have 3 minutes, so that I have to use it. At FNA, I don't know if you're aware, but we're working with what it's called national fraud portals, which have to do with not only with people reporting these scams and frauds, but also with recoverability. And Arvinder, you mentioned something about recovering the money, because at the end, the users, I mean, you can never be sure that the users are able to avoid being scammed or to be victims of fraud, but systems could do something about monitoring or tracing the money and try to recover it. I mean, there's something which is prevention, there's something which is like trying to get the money back to their rightful owners. Is that perhaps something that is missing in this kind of, I would say retail, it's mostly retail, but is that something that could be missing in some of the strategies worldwide?
Well, I wouldn't say it's missing, but I think this is where trade-offs come in. This is where balances need to be struck. Today's world, if you lose your wallet with cash in it, the only recourse you've got, you go and report it to the police and you hope that somebody will return it, right? It's not easy to get. Does digitalization of that kind of thing help? Yes, absolutely it does, because everything has an ID, everything has a token ID of some sort or some kind of identification. But how much of that should we be allowed, or should the authorities be allowed to use? Because that's when the anonymity part goes away or starts to be compromised. The privacy considerations come in. So a balance needs to be struck there in terms of what amount of information is enough to give consumers the recourse they need without compromising their privacy. So to me, it's not a missing conversation, but rather an unconcluded at this point in time conversation. A lot of discussion is going on.
Good. So I'm going to have a last question from, this one is from the attendees, which is for you both. What are the most critical technological advancements or innovations central banks should prioritize to enhance the cybersecurity defenses of digital payment systems? Hard one, right? I know.
Beju, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's
I don't think
just technology on its own there's a people element and training element, skills development element, and ongoing awareness around that. And that's absolutely key. And then there's some robust tools already out there, but it's also then adapting that through to an ongoing threat landscape. So have you got the right tools to detect, monitor, and everything else? But also, and also how you're planning around constant change. Have you got the right leadership in place too? Do they have the right are they under a CIO, or do they have a board level kind of representative, and do they have physical and cybersecurity together and things like that? So there's both people and tech, and it's not just tech on its own, because some of the tools are already there and they're good. And they will constantly evolve, but having the people structure in place and the governance and actually that ear up and actually the ability to respond is probably where my answer would be. But
yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a combination of governance, people, users, and those that run the show, technology, and so on. But just to add to what Beju said, there is also the importance of collaboration amongst agencies, amongst countries, and so on, because no one can consider themselves. I mean, cyber risk is boundaryless. It has no geographic boundaries. It cannot work on your own. It just would be less effective. You need to collaborate in terms of not just threat intelligence, in terms of what people are seeing, but also in terms of solution intelligence. How are you managing these?
And I would add, if you allow me, that there is something, let's say not new, but we have immediacy of the payments, but interoperability makes everything more difficult, because we're changing the kind of money from commercial bank to central bank money and so on and so forth. So I think that it's very difficult for recoverability monitoring and coping with fraud and scams is rather difficult, and that's the real challenge. So Arvider, Beju, thank you very much for joining us today. It has been a
pleasure.
Enjoyable and very interesting conversation. I don't know if you want to say something just to end your contribution, or
just to say thank you, and those of you who did attend, thanks for making the time, and hopefully it was useful.
Yes, thank you for having us. It was very enjoyable.
Thank you both. We're 2 minutes past the hour, but let me finish this CBDC broadcast number 27 with Arvinder and Beju, in which we discussed the risks, tokenized securities and CBDC integration, and also how to mitigate them. Upcoming events in the month of July, we have the CBDC broadcast number 28, in which we're going to discuss fast payment systems and CBDCs with the World Bank and the Central Bank of Brazil. The Consumer Fraud and Scams broadcast number 2, in which we're going to discuss data and AI in digital finance era, and also the payment system broadcast number 17, in which we're going to talk about the very hot topic, regulated liability network. So thank you everyone for attending today. Once again, Arvinder and Beju, lovely discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.